Hello, and tonight, since Halloween is approaching once again here in central Alabama, I go back into my ghost files for a ghostly story I want to tell you tonight. Okay, and here we go on this ghostly Alabama adventure tonight. This is kind of a not a real long little ghost story, but I'm going to refer to my notes that I got out of the file. I've got them up here in front of me to where I can remember all the details. I remember very well whenever it was told to me and what all happened over there when I did take the report. Of course, I don't use real names and that type of stuff in the videos because in a small town, people would know immediately exactly who I was talking about in this video. But anyway, the following ghost story that I'm about to tell you happened about 20 years ago, around 1988, I believe was when I investigated this and heard the details on this particular ghost story. It was in northern Chambers County, which is pretty close to where I live, on a little dirt road. And what we'll be talking about is a old farmhouse. Well, I'll just tell you the story rather than telling you exactly what I will be talking about. This particular ghostly encounter happened to a family. They were very good friends of mine. I had known them for quite some time and believed everything that they said whenever they told me this ghost story, because also had somebody else to back up what they saw and this type of stuff that was not a family member, but it was in the house one time whenever a haunting took place over there. Now, the old house had been empty for several years prior to this family moving back into the area. The man had completed a military tour. I'm not sure how many years he was in the military, but whenever they moved to Wadley, or moved back to Wadley, they purchased this farmhouse and some land that had pastures and barns and that type of stuff. And of course, the old house and the barns and the fences all needed repair whenever the family moved back into it. But that's what they planned to do, was to restore it back to its original condition. Not just the house, the barns, and everything. So after the bank loans had been completed, and we all know about bank loans and making payments, this was a house that the couple planned to live in for a long, long time while their children completed going to school. And over time, through a lot of work and renovation, the old house became to look its normal self again. It was a high ceiling, large room farmhouse. They had painted the house back its original color, which was white, and it had a porch that spanned 3 sides of the house. And in late afternoons, in summer, I have been over there and really enjoyed sitting on the front porch talking and sitting in these high back wooden rocking chairs on the porch, and you just pretty much forget all your troubles and everything while you were sitting around over there. There was always a breeze, seemed like, was on one end of the porch that came through these very old oak trees, and they would just the breeze would just caress your face and your brow and your head, and it was just very relaxing over there. The old place once again became a home. The old house held a secret that would soon send this family running out of that house on a cold winter night. Now, the first time that I knew that this old house was haunted or might be haunted came from a report that happened on one Saturday afternoon at a birthday party there. There was a young man there, and we'll call him Billy. He was turning 9 years old, and he was having a birthday party on Saturday afternoon, and he had invited several of his friends from school to attend the birthday party, and the young boys that he invited this particular Saturday afternoon had all been out in the front yard playing ball, like boys at that age enjoy doing. And it was about 3 o'clock that Billy's mom, who we'll call Trish, called to the boys to come inside for cake and let's get the party started so we could begin opening presents and that type of stuff. And of course, Billy was very anxious to get in there and get to the presents that everyone had brought him. And in just a little while, they cut the cake, and it wasn't very long till eating the cake and ice cream part was over in the party. And they all made their way to the living room where they watched Billy open all his gifts that everyone had brought. And after he opened them, they all began to play with some of the things that he had received that afternoon. The party had been actually scheduled to end about 5 o'clock. And so 5 o'clock came and went, and parents came by and picked up their children and carried them back home. The party was over, but Billy's best friend was a little boy named John. And Billy asked John if he could call his parents and see if he could stay a little bit longer, because at this particular time, video games were kind of something new. And he had received a video game player, and he had got a very popular video game from someone at that particular time. And he wanted John to stay over there about another hour or so while they played this video game. So John called his parents and asked them if it'd be okay if he just stayed on about another hour, rather than picking him up around 5. Would they wait till about 6? And of course they said okay, and that was what happened. Anyway, about this time, Billy and John decided that they wanted the rest of the birthday cake, which was only about a couple of pieces left. But they thought they would just eat some birthday cake before they got to play in this video game and drink up the rest of the Kool-Aid. Billy told John he was going into the dining room to get the rest of the cake for him. And so John just sat in the living room out there playing with some of the gifts that Billy had received that afternoon. And as he sat there, this little girl came walking through the living room where John was sitting on the floor. And she looked to be around 7 or 8 years old. She was a pretty little girl. She was dressed in a pretty white dress. And it was a type of dress that made John think of little girls that were in like old TV Western movies that he and his grandfather had watched on TV. But anyway, the little girl walked by him, not real close to him, but walked through the living room, and she walked out the door into the hall. And he wondered why he hadn't seen this little girl earlier at the party, and who she was and where she came from. But anyway, just behind the little girl walked this little dog. It was a white little curly-haired dog that John took to be a poodle. And anyway, as the little girl walked by and walked out the doorway, she turned her head and looked at John and said, "Hey." And of course, John replied, "Hey," back to her as she walked out of sight. Then, as she began walking out of the room through the doorway and into the hall, he noticed that there was something strange about the little girl. He could almost see through her. And then he looked at the dog, and he could almost see through the dog. He could see the window facing or the door facing as they walked past it through them. And they didn't appear to be totally solid to him. And he'd never experienced anything like this, and it sort of frightened him a little bit. But in just a few moments, Billy and his mom came walking back into the room with the cake and the Kool-Aid. And John's first question was, whenever they walked in there, was, who was that little girl? This kind of surprised Billy's mom and Billy whenever John asked about this little girl. They had a surprised look on their face and in their voice whenever Billy's mom, Trish, said, "Did you see her too?" And of course, John asked, "Yes, I saw her and a little dog." And then Billy and Trish kind of looked at each other as if they didn't hardly know what to say or how to answer that. But anyway, Billy's mom said that was our ghost, and said she's been here as long as we've lived in this house, she and her little dog. She said, "Don't be frightened," said she won't bother you. And then together, Billy and Trish kind of explained to John that she must have lived here a long time ago, and she still remained here for whatever the reason was, and she only showed up from time to time and had never tried to scare or harm anyone, but she was mostly seen in the house, walking through the living room and walking down the hallway. And it wasn't too long now till John's dad pulled up into the driveway, and of course John said his goodbyes and walked on out the door to go home. And now this was the first time that I heard anything about the house being haunted or possibly haunted, because it was later on that week that John's dad contacted me and told me what his son had seen in this particular house that Saturday afternoon. So a few months passed, and of course I did a ghost report on this, and made a few brief details on what John's dad told me. Then I filed a report away in my files, as you saw earlier, with the other area ghost stories, and I didn't think a whole lot more about it. There was always reports of ghosts, Bigfoot, UFOs, and just all type of paranormal stuff coming my way. But then one night, it was sometime later, I checked into a hotel in a town in northern Alabama. And the reason I was up there, of course, was I was on a Bigfoot investigation, and I ran into this young woman that I knew. We both recognized each other just about the time that I walked in the hotel door and walked up to the front desk. It was Billy's older sister, Lisa. Now, after some time, Lisa was a tall, blonde-haired girl, and she was a very beautiful girl. She was probably around about 25 years old now, and when we recognized each other, well, we just struck up a conversation as I was signing in and everything that night, because we had known each other several years earlier, and she asked what I was doing so far away from home and at this late time of night. And I told her, as usual, I was hot on the trail of a Bigfoot that had recently been spotted in the mountains near the town that I was in. And our conversation then quickly went to paranormal, and she told me of her interest in paranormal topics, and as well as Native American Indians' way of life and their belief. Well, when she said that, that was my two favorite subjects anyway, and we discovered that we had these same interests, and we began talking, and after a few minutes, she came out from behind the front desk, and we walked into the lobby and sat down and began talking about all type of paranormal stuff and everything. It just seemed to both of us, we both mentioned it that night, that some force or something had apparently gotten us together on this night. And I believe that there had to be, as since we were so far apart and hadn't seen each other in such a long time, and we were a long way from where we both had once lived at the same time. And soon after we talked, it seemed like time just really passed by. And it was well in the early hours of morning that she mentioned their old house where they had lived whenever I had known them here. And she told me that that house was very haunted, and that was why she and her family actually moved from the house, was because it was so haunted, and they had this very terrifying experience there one night. And that was the reason that they actually moved out of the area. And whenever she told me that, I asked her if she would to tell me about it. And she went into detail and told me the events that occurred in that house only a very few years earlier. And that's what I'm going to tell you now. But I'm going to have to get my throat cleared. Ragweed and pollen taking its toll on me this year. Now, this was pretty much what Lisa told me. She said her father was a truck driver, which I knew. He was an over-the-road truck driver, and over-the-road driver means that whenever they're working, sometimes they're gone for days or maybe sometime a week or more at a time away from home. And this had been the case, or what had happened whenever this particular ghostly encounter happened. He had been to Arizona or New Mexico. She said she couldn't remember exactly which one, but he was returning home that night, and he had stopped at a truck stop somewhere along the road and called him and told him that he would be in that night. In those days, in the 80s, cell phones were not as common and as much used as they are now, so that's why he called him just on the regular house phone, because cell phones hadn't been really invented at this time. But anyway, they were glad to hear from Dad, and that he was going to be home that night around midnight. Well, anyway, midnight came and went, and Dad hadn't hardly made it home yet, so the kids were already getting sleepy, and the family just decided to go on to bed. And it was about 1:30 in the morning when Dad finally came down the dirt road, and he made his hard left turn into the driveway. Anyway, they would all be up just as soon as Dad opened the door and they heard his voice call to him that he had arrived back home. But tonight, they wouldn't hear those words. The words like that would not fill the house. As a matter of fact, a desperate plea from Dad was about to fill the house, a plea to his family to get out of the house in freezing cold weather in the middle of the night as fast as they could. But anyway, backing up just a little bit, as the roar of the diesel engine made its way slowly along the driveway and Dave pulled the shifter into a low gear for the tractor rig to inch slowly closer to the front door, he saw something on the top step of the porch. But anyway, as he inched forward, the truck was bobtailed as he had dropped his trailer in a nearby parking lot. That way he wouldn't have any problem getting the truck into the yard that night and everything if he wasn't pulling the trailer. But anyway, as he began inching toward the doorsteps, he was thinking of the hugs and that he would get from his children, and for the long-awaited embrace that from his wife that was just behind that front door. But as he smiled, his smiles began to turn into screams in just a few minutes, as well as commands to his family in total horror and total fear at what he had encountered. The headlights illuminated the front porch steps where he saw a scene that he said he would never forget until the day his coffin lid closed shut for the final time. Sitting on the top step was the little girl, at least her ghost, of the one that had lived in their house. But only tonight she looked a little different. Her sweet little face didn't have its usual innocent smile. Tonight her head was dropped low into her two tiny hands, and the little delicate hey she had said so many times to every member of the family and visitors as well from time to time was now cries and sobs of pain. And you could tell it was the kind of pain that comes from the worst agony of all, the pain and agony of heartbreak unimaginable. And her little dog that had followed her constantly with a little spring in its step and its wagging tail lay motionless beside her. And what Dave was seeing, to top everything else off, aside from everything that he was seeing. Now let me pause for just a minute, and as always when I start doing ghost videos, the camera starts turning off. So anyway, this was the third time the camera's turned off. I don't know if you caught the other two or not. But anyway, let me just start back over a little bit so I know what I'm talking about. What he noticed, what was so devastating about what he was seeing, as I said earlier, both the little girl and the dog were just drenched, covered in blood. And for a moment, Dave didn't think about this being the little ghost girl. He thought it was possibly a neighbor child. And as any normal parent would do, he either locked the truck down or he shut the engine off one, and he jumped from the cab and ran toward her, calling to her as he ran, trying to comfort her. But as he reached the bottom of the step, just like John had done sometime earlier, he could almost see through her. And then he realized that it was the little ghost girl that had lived in their house. And when he saw this, he stopped dead in his tracks, and he noticed that there even appeared to be puddles of blood around the little girl as well as the dog. And his first thought was run back to the truck and get out of Dodge as quick as you can. But then his family was inside the house, and this specter sat between him and them. But he had to get to his loved ones. He sort of stepped to one side from the steps, and he jumped up on the porch. And then he ran past two ghosts. And as he reached the front door, of course, the front door was locked. And he tried to open it, but the door handle wouldn't turn. And he reached into his jeans front pocket to get the house key so he could unlock the door and get on in there to get his family out. And then he realized, as you always do whenever there's an emergency, you always leave something somewhere you're not supposed to. And that's what he had done with his house keys. They were on the truck ignition key, and he had left them inside the truck. But anyway, he just took he was becoming so frightened and everything that he just took a step back and kicked the door right next to the door handle, as you do when you want to kick a door open. And he kicked it as hard as he could, and of course the door facing splintered, and the door swung wide open, and it hit hard against the wall. And as he ran into the house, he began screaming to his family to get up, to wake up and get out of this house. Everybody was pretty much sound asleep, and everyone began waking up. And Lisa said that her first thought was whenever she heard him screaming to get out of the house and to wake up and get out of the house, that her first thought was maybe the house was on fire, because they did have a fireplace that they used some, but that was not the case this night. But anyway, he ordered them very loud yells and screams. They all came running into the living room, and he told them that they had to get out of the house right now, in which they did. I'm not sure who led the way out of the house, but Lisa said as they came out that they ran past this little girl and the dog and just ran like down the side of the steps. And she said she could still remember to this day, as she ran past this little girl, that she could hear her crying. But it was just in a few seconds that the entire family was in the cab of the truck. And of course, Dave had fired it back up, and they were pulling out of the driveway, and they headed to a nearby town where there was a local hotel. And that's where they spent the rest of the night, was in this hotel, as well as the next couple of so days. This, as a matter of fact, was the last night that the family spent in this house. And very soon, Dave and his wife listed this house with a realtor, and it sold for a very reasonable bargain price not long after that. The house was sold completely furnished. They never returned to this house for anything, not groceries, not appliances or furniture, not even their own personal effects such as toothbrushes and medicines and clothes. Lisa said that they just left everything in the house as it was that night when they ran out, that they never went back in this house again. So, for the most part, now the family has put this otherworldly encounter behind them. And it did cause some problems between Dave and Trish. Not long after this, Trish began having a lot of emotional problems. And it wasn't long after that that the couple decided to part and go their separate ways, which was a sad ending also to the story. But what was the reason behind this terrible haunting? What happened to this little girl and her dog that manifested in such a horrible scene? Was this particular night when this encounter happened, was that the anniversary of their deaths, and are they condemned to have to live that over and over? I guess we'll just never know for certain. But now that's the way the story was told to me, as sad as it is. And now today there is a new family living within the walls of this old house. And I always wonder every time I pass by the house, is this little girl and her dog part of this new family that lives there now? Or on that particular night, did she finally find the path to move on to the other world? Or did her family and some loved ones that had gone on before reach out to her and lead her to the light? I just wonder, are the two companions, the little girl and her dog, finally now at rest? I sincerely hope they are. And that was tonight's Alabama adventure, and I wanted to go out on location since the weather has cooled off and it's not real cold winter yet. I wanted to go out and do this particular video on location, but due to some vandalism and things that I've had around here, I'm not able to go anywhere. I'm out of a way to ride right now because of that, but hopefully that'll be remedied soon. It's always something. But on a little bit better note, I've got something that I want you to look at tonight. A few days ago, as Dorothy and I have been having to do for the last few months, we had to make a trip to Montgomery. I have to go to the eye doctor, eye surgeon down there, and had to go back. And anyway, still having trouble with my eyes. And anyway, on the way back, as we were nearing Alexander City, we ran up on this old Buckboard. And we stopped and did a little videoing, and I talked with the nice people that owned it very briefly. But anyway, I want you to look at this old Buckboard real quick before we go tonight. Okay, now, if you want to see this buckboard, if you want to go video it or make a picture of it or stand by it and get a picture made with it, here's what you can do. Go to Alexander City. It is at a business called Southern Star Pet Grooming and Boarding. And I told them I would mention their name if they didn't mind it on our next video. And I'm also going to give you their telephone number in case you need your dog groomed or if you need him trimmed. And their number down there is 256 215 5586. And when you call them, tell them about us here at Alabama Bigfoot Society, that we got to video their buckboard and very much appreciate it. I got to talk very briefly with one of their very nice, very pretty technicians in there. And that's worth a trip down there just to get to talk to her. And they will take care of your dog down there for you. Anyway, just if you don't mind, mention our name whenever you talk to them. One other little thing that I want to mention about that buckboard as I swing around in front of it to where you can see the tongue, I believe it's what it's called on it. If you'll notice, this was a buckboard that would be pulled by two horses. If you will notice right there in front, those two things on the tongue of the buckboard are called single trees, and that you had to have one single tree per horse or mule whenever you hook something up. And this had two single trees on it, so that means that it took two horses to pull this particular buckboard. Not that the buckboard was that heavy, but with all the supplies and stuff that you might pick up when you went into town, then it would make it a little bit easier on the horses if you had two pulling. Anyway, just a little something I wanted to add there about the buckboard. And as I mentioned earlier, we had to go to Montgomery to the eye doctor this particular day that we did the video of the little buckboard. But anyway, I want to tell you a little story about what happened down there. I can't call the doctor's name. He might not want to be associated with Bigfoot and that type of stuff. But anyway, that's who he's been doctoring on, whether he knows it or not. But anyway, he did learn something else that morning, and I'm going to share that little story with you right quick. Before we left that morning, I cut my thumb, and I put a Band-Aid on it, of course, and every time I would reach into my pocket like to get my keys or my cell phone or whatever, the little Band-Aid would roll up. I guess my blue jeans were a little bit tight that day or something, but anyway, the Band-Aid would roll up on the side of my pocket and would come loose. So after I replaced about the third or fourth Band-Aid that morning, I decided when I put the last one on to just get a piece of duct tape and tape my Band-Aid on my thumb, as I'll show you right here. Right there you can see that I have a Band-Aid on, and I have taken duct tape and I have taped the Band-Aid on there so it won't come loose. And that's what I had done that morning. We went to the eye doctor, and anyway, we sat there in the waiting room for just a few minutes, and we got called back and went back there, and in just a moment or two, the doctor came in. Now, keep in mind that this is an eye surgeon, and he's a very serious doctor about what he does, and I'm certainly glad that he is when it comes to eyesight. And he came in, of course, and shook hands, and how you doing today, and I'm fine. And he took my thumb in his hand, and he said, what is this? And I told him what I just told you about the Band-Aid and the duct tape. And I said, now you can tell people that, how do you know when you're doctoring a redneck? They come in with duct tape on to hold a Band-Aid in place. And he just sort of ducked his head and laughed and shook his head. I thought it was kind of funny that this very serious doctor about his work, and as I said, I am very appreciative that he is, but I did get a big laugh out of him that morning whenever I said, you're a doctor and a redneck. And I have had a lot of my viewers to call me redneck, and I don't deny being a redneck. I am in many ways proud to be a redneck. And if some of you out there have ever dated a redneck girl, as I'm sure you have heard songs about, then you'd be proud to be one too. Anyway, that was just a little story that happened in Montgomery at the eye doctor, and I wanted to pass that along while we were doing this video tonight. But anyway, as I always do, I would like to say hello to my granddaughter Madison. I would like to tell you that the Alabama Bigfoot Society is run completely out of pocket, and if you would like to make a donation so we can continue doing what we're doing down here and repairing vandalism work, if you would like to make a donation, it would be very, very much appreciated. If you like this video, I hope you give us a like, and if you like what we're doing down here with our paranormal work and investigations, would like you to subscribe to the channel, and of course share this video with anybody and everybody that you can think of. If you would like to make a donation, you can go on our website, alabamabigfootsociety.com, and you'll find a place there on the front page to make that donation. And as I said, it would be very much appreciated. But with all that being said, I guess I'll be looking for you next time on the next Alabama Adventure.